Hi everyone, and welcome to the Engage Journal podcast. I'm Professor Sarah Perks, and I'm host and editor, and really looking forward to sharing this journey with you. We'll delve deep into the topics we explore through the digital journal and talk to lots of fantastic guests from everywhere, including, of course, our wonderful members. If you are not a member, you're extremely welcome to listen along and enjoy. And also, why not then become a member so you can read the journal as well? Engage are the leading charity for promoting engagement and participation in the visual arts, working across the UK and beyond. And also, they have lots of amazing projects and events that you can take part in. So check out the website at engage.org and you'll find everything there. So this is episode 1 of our brand new series, the first ever series, I should add, and it's called Analysis, which matches the first section of our journal on the topic of Generation Z and the future of creative work. Now, I do understand the decision to focus solely on Generation Z might be considered a little bit problematic, both in terms of not acknowledging the full age range of anyone considered early career, or for lumping together a 15-year age group into easily consumable stereotypes. But neither are our intention. We do see the limitations, but really want to use a lens to show the concerns of a moment in which young people have been subjected to a tremendous moment of uncertainty and instability, and to recognise young people as a priority focus for our visual art engagement programmes and projects. Generation Z is widely used to reference those born after 1997 up to about 2012. So broadly speaking, everyone about 10 to 25 years old. Following Generation X, hello friends, and also the Millennials or the Ys. And this group will also be followed by Generation A or Alpha. And Gen Z has a distinct set of contemporary socio-economic and political factors, including, of course, the global pandemic, a rise of populist politics, and the climate crisis. So we're going to start with analysis, and we have 3 sections to this podcast. First of all, I speak to the Centre for the Future of Work, which is Dr. Mansoor, Soomro, and Dr. Xiaoxian from Teesside University. Then we'll be speaking to Eliza Easton, who is Deputy Director at the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, led by Nesta. And then I'm popping over the water to Dublin to speak to Adam Stoneman, who is Spice Project Researcher at IMMA. I'm so happy to start my podcast here with some of my fabulous colleagues at Teesside University. I'm here with Dr. Xiaoxian and Dr. Mansoor Soomro, and they are part of the research group for the future of work. So I'd like to ask you both to introduce yourselves and share with me your favourite museum or art gallery. Xiaoxian.
Hi, I'm Xiaoxian. I'm a principal lecturer research innovation at Teesside University International Business School and who looks at talent management, skills, and employability. My favorite ever museum is British Museum because it collects quite a variety and diversity of the stories, history, and piece of arts, and that will bring us to a lot of memories and learn a lot of knowledges.
Brilliant. Love the British Museum. Mansoor.
Hi, I'm Mansoor Soomro, and I'm a senior lecturer in sustainability and international business at Teesside University International Business School. I'm also the innovation and enterprise lead at the Center for the Future of Work as part of our business school. My research revolves around topics like sustainability and digital transformation. My favorite museum is Railway Museum in York. I enjoyed visiting it with my kids recently. It showcases past, present, and future of railways and engineering. The thing that particularly excites me is how engineers, innovators, and thinkers work in cohesion.
Great stuff. Thank you. Now, Xiaoxian, tell us a bit more about this future of work and the research group.
Our research group Future Work is actually a research center which aims to develop research, innovation, and commercial solutions to those challenges currently presented by ever-changing workplace and workforce. So we investigate and research on many different things, including responsible leadership, organizational culture, corporate social responsibility, performance innovation, labor market, talent development, and well-being.
And can you give me an example of a research project and how it works?
For example, we currently have a live project, which is a European Social Fund project, collaborating with local authorities. So this project is titled as Skill for Growth. It's a joint initiative between the university and the local authority. So we identify this project. In this project, we identify skills needs and assess employee training to help business growth in the Tees Valley region, which is the northeast region of England. So for this project, our researchers are carrying out study into identifying the skill needs of key Tees Valley sectors and work in partnership with local authority to provide intelligence to the skills advisor, delivering support to local business, provide Tees Valley educational provider with long-term sector skills roadmaps that can ensure supply meets demand.
I see, right. So let's jump straight in. What are the big topics that everyone is talking about in this field?
In this field, there are many hot topics at the moment. So, for example, talent management, including talent attraction, development, retain talents, and especially, for example, in creative and cultural sector. And the second topic, which is quite popular at the moment, is innovations in responsible management education. And other hot topic including policy engagement for sustainable growth. So, for example, we have a sustainability development goal, which is decent work and economic growth. So that including we're looking at how AI, artificial intelligence, and the digitalization impact at workplace and their effects on the people at workplace, impact on the work pattern, and how the different way of the people work.
Great. So Mansoor, they're the big headlines. Now, how do you work with those specifically, and what do you specialize in?
The world of work is changing. So, artificial intelligence and automation will make this shift as significant as the mechanization in prior generations of agriculture and manufacturing. For example, Chat GPT, the last few weeks we have seen OpenAI. It took 5 days for Chat GPT, it's an OpenAI platform. It took them 5 days to reach 1 million users. Whereas if we look at WhatsApp, it was launched officially in 2009, and it took almost 10 years to reach to the position where it reached close to 1 million users. So if you compare 10 years with 5 days, it's crazy and it's significant that how the world is changing. While some jobs will be lost and many others created, almost everything will change. So, Professor Sarah, as you know, the COVID-19 crisis accelerated existing trends and caused organizations to reevaluate many aspects of work. At our Future of Work Center, we specialize in three areas. Number one, leadership and change management. Number two, people and culture. Number three, sustainability, as Xiaoxian mentioned just now. The 21st century has already brought astonishing technological achievements. So, from smartphones to internet shopping, our lives have significantly transformed in many ways. Some of the questions that we are researching include: number one, how technology is transforming companies and industries. Number two, why some places are better at adapting to this transformation. And number three, what are the implications for living standards, inequality, and social mobility? So, when it comes to the capabilities of intelligent machines, we have seen nothing yet. So, how can we prepare future generations for a very different world of work? That's the grand question that we are trying to address.
So, thinking about Generation Z specifically, what do you think is unique about the current challenges that are affecting them in terms of future work?
That's interesting. The Workforce Institute in Germany surveyed over 3,000 members of Generation Z across the globe. The survey reflected that they are the hardest working generation ever. This emerging generation has higher expectations for the workplace than ever before. They prioritize flexible working arrangements, shared values, higher pay, and increased support for mental health. Generation Zs not only know what they want, they are more likely to seek out new opportunities to get that. So that's positive, but that comes with the flip side to it, which is that this generation, Generation Z, they have come in this world at a time when there are immense challenges: climate change, inequality, social unrest, political division, economic distress, and more. Having said that, Generation Z workers have their own specific attributes. They expect authentic leadership and human connection. Some 42% of Generation Z workers value work life balance, remote working, and flexible leave options as their top priority when looking for a job, as per a recent US survey. So Generation Z respondents, I mean, there's a positive side to it, and there's a flip side to it as well. But it's important that at the time in the world at which this generation is up and running, inflation is the top problem, and this will be one of the biggest challenges which will reshape the way this generation progresses.
And just picking up about sustainability and the circular economy, it feels like it's something that we talk about a lot and we know about, but we haven't got it sorted yet. So, what is it that we actually need to do?
Yeah, so there are two things. One is desire, the other one is action. So there's too much talk and too little action, in my view. So what we need is more concentrated efforts. We need more genuine effort, and the whole ecosystem has to work together on this. So from governance to operations, from bureaucrats to masses, we're all in this together. So I think that's one of the reasons why we still have not been able to solve this part of the puzzle.
Right, got it. Xiaoxian, one of your specialist areas is around talent and skills development. Can you tell us about some of the issues that are prevalent, for example, in the high tech industries that the creative sector could really be thinking about now?
Thank you, Sarah. And I think within the high tech industry and the creative sector in particular, um, there's there are developing and retaining skills which have become quite challenging, especially since the late 2019 and within this particular sector. This is both at the creative talent level and also management and leadership level. Therefore, in the creative sector, organization and association should have look at talent management system. So, for example, do they have the appropriate and the systematic talent management system, including the talent approaches and the talent recruitment, talent pool and the pipelines development, and the talent retention system? And so, one of the other challenges and what they should think right now is seeking a specialization that can train them with necessary leadership skills, equip themselves with the right formation to handle the sector and unlock the managerial skills of the culture and creative industry. Lastly, it's important to considering the different sizes and the different cultures within the organization and association in the sector, identify their unique attraction points that can motivate, attract talented generation into the sector, and also nurture and retain them, building up future leaders and leadership skill.
Great. A question for both of you. What really excites you when you think about the future of work? Xiaoshan.
When we talk about future work, what excites us is our curiosity towards the ever-changing world of work. So, for example, how we as a small, as an individual, but collaboratively can play a big part to contribute towards the sustainable development goal in terms of decent work and economic growth. and how we actually can strategic planning and look ahead for the future. So there are a lot of opportunity and future aspects we can see from now. So that is very exciting us. So therefore, I think that's why we working with organizations, policymakers, and the wider society, and develop and foster responsible and sustainable approach to business leadership, strategy, and stakeholder engagement. By doing that, we take a future-facing approach, and our work then can support the development of agile and entrepreneurial organizations that are ethical, compassionate, and inclusive, that can contribute positively to the economy, society, and the environment.
Thank you. Mansoor, what excites you?
I mean, I can't agree more, Dr. Xiaoxian, on that. Future of work has arrived, and organizations must truly understand the uncertainty of change in order to make appropriate changes across the different levels. In short, organizations need to prioritize how they will derive value from their financial, human, and technological capital. We have seen recently terms like quiet quitting, great resignation, hybrid work, 4-day working week. I mean, these are the questions, these are the themes that are motivating us at the Center for the Future of Work. In terms of the 4-day working week, UK initiated the largest pilot recently in terms of the 4-day working week. The interim results were released recently, and the companies that were part of this pilot and the employees who are part of this, they don't want to go back to the 5-day working model, the existing one. So certainly there's some value that these companies saw from different and diverse industries. Again, there are benefits for both employers as well as employees for the 4-day working week, which then will call us for a 3-day weekend. So the future of work is changing. It's dramatically changing. It's interesting time. But what we need to understand is what's temporary and what's transformative. All in all, it's a brave new world, and we are ready to embrace it.
Fascinating stuff. I like the idea of the 4-day working week. What is your best piece of advice for our Generation Z listeners as they start and continue their future work journeys? Mansoor.
So there are different labels that we see for Generation Z. So Generation Z, I mean, they've been called as individualistic and stressed, but at the same time socially aware, creative, diverse, and authentic. Looking at the broader picture, I mean, by 2025, as per the estimates, they will make up almost 30% of the global workforce. So certainly they are coming big, and they need the due attention. Um, to your question, Prof. Sarah, what's the best piece of advice? So for Generation Z, you people are intent on making an impact at work and in the world. You are digitally savvy, you are innovative and bold, and that's what makes you powerful. On the other side, employers who want to connect with them, they have to connect with Gen Z colleagues more physically, emotionally, and mentally in order to win their talent, efforts, and loyalty. And all in all, then there will be a win win for all the stakeholders in the process.
Thank you. Xiaoxian.
I think Generation Z is a group of generation who is already very bright and have their own ideas and the plan for the future. And I think they have a strategic planning and willing to play part of the contribution in the future work, and which is brilliant. And so for them to continue their future work journey, and I think one advice is continue to just play a part to contribute to the sustainability in terms of business sustainability and people sustainability, and also the societal sustainability. And also, secondly, I think continues to build up the skills for the future skills. And when we talk about the employability today, we no longer talk only about to be employed, have the skills to be allowed them to employed in the sector, but also look to have a little bit of long-term sustainable as in the sustainable environment. Lastly, the Generation Z is the future workforce and the future leaders. So therefore, you need to build up the leadership skills in the sector for the society and to build collaboratively for the bright future.
Great advice there. Thank you both. And thank you for joining us and sharing your really strong, really interesting research with us. So you've been listening to Dr. Xiaoxian Ju and Dr. Mansoor Soomro, and they are part of the Centre for the Future of Work at Teesside University. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Whilst researching the future of creative work, I came across a couple of really excellent reports by the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre and Nesta that were written about 5 years ago. And I thought, right, let's revisit these. And also, fortunately, one of the co-authors and an expert in this field is here to introduce them and talk us through where we think we are now. I'd like to welcome Eliza Easton, who is Deputy Director at the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre. So Eliza, please could you introduce yourself and share with me your favourite ever podcast?
Oh, that is such a good question. Hi, I'm Eliza Easton. As Sarah said, I'm Deputy Director at the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre. And at the moment, the PEC is, as we call it, is led by Nesta, which you may know as an innovation foundation, and also involves sort of 10 universities, lots of academics and sort of think tank people who spend their time trying to help the government to make policy around the creative industries a little bit better and a little bit more evidence-led. I'm actually a huge podcast aficionado. I used to have a podcast listening group, which was like a book group, but was for podcasts. And we'd listen to a different podcast every week and then we'd all chat about it. So I have so many great examples that I could give you. But my real comfort podcast is the Adam and Buxton podcast, because I used to listen to the Adam and Joe radio show when I was younger. So it always brings back kind of very fond memories for me.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I was really taken back by your biog and where you stated in particular that you fell in love with creative industries policy. So can you tell us a little bit more about this and your career trajectory?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a strange one, because I think if you'd asked me right up until the point where I started thinking about creative industries policy as a possible career, it was not really on my radar at all. But then looking back, you're always able to sort of form a logic. So I actually studied history of art. And when I studied history of art, my interest was often in thinkers who spent their time trying to understand how industrial change or societal change and art and culture interacted. So those are people like William Morris, John Ruskin. There's a workshop that sat alongside the Bloomsbury group, the literary group, called the Omega Workshop. And then I was also really interested in kind of the medieval period and art and culture in that. After university, I was lucky enough to do a year working as a curatorial assistant in Wadston Manor, which is a National Trust property in Buckinghamshire. I lived on the grounds, which was just completely extraordinary, actually, and really the perfect way to kind of live right up close with the pieces of art and culture that you're talking to people about on a daily basis. And during that period, they really supported me actually to start writing about art and culture as well. So I was writing for a few magazines. I wrote my own blog about living in Wadston. Wasn't something I'd really done much of at university, so it felt like quite a scary thing to do. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and I couldn't drive, you don't really have much of an option but to do something that was a little bit scary or spend even more time in the pub. So I started writing. And I think that's when I started sort of considering what was happening. It was really sort of a period of financial change and austerity and early days of austerity. And so I wanted to understand what was going to happen to arts and culture during that period. And so I was thinking about that a little bit in my writing. I also think that living somewhere like Waddesdon gave me a different sense, having grown up in a big city, about how art, culture and heritage can be important in different kinds of communities, more rural communities. So all of this came together, and someone sent me an opportunity for a job at the Creative Industries Federation, as it was then. In fact, it wasn't then because it didn't exist yet. I don't think it had a name. But I heard all these big sort of thinkers and big players in art, culture, and the wider creative industries were setting up an organisation to represent the sector's views to government. And so I think I joined 3 days a week and left my Waddesdon job, moved back to London. I think my job was unnamed and then eventually was something along the lines of policy researcher. But luckily, the Federation was a huge success, grew. I ended up running their research team. Now it's become Creative UK. So I think from the point where I started writing, really, it clicked for me that what I was interested in is how all of these ideas, which can seem quite airy-fairy, have very real ramifications in how people experience sort of life, whether that's their material wealth because of the job they do, or whether that's just the enjoyment that they get out of life, whether that's what they're convinced to buy or what they do buy. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a love story, really, but one which makes a lot more sense looking back than it did when I was making all these decisions at the time, maybe.
Yeah, it seems like it's always the way, and it's really great to see some curatorial experience in there, and it's great that I'm sure that's shaping your vision going forward. But tell us a little bit about how policy affects the real world. So how does it help bring about change?
Well, there's all kinds of different policies and they bring about all kinds of different changes, obviously. I think we mostly think about policy often in terms of negative impact. So we see it when it goes as opposed to when it's there. We see when funding is decreased because you may be, watching the English National Opera, a stalwart of the London West End. There's questions now about whether that will continue to be in London or continue to exist at all. And so we're very aware of policy, the background to the policies kind of supporting the ENO when they're removed. I think there are areas when there are almost political footballs where, like skills, every government that comes in makes changes, and that has huge ramifications for the people who go through sort of school or the education system over that time, whether that's literally the school they go to. Think about the massive move to academies that we've seen over my lifetime, or whether that's in terms of like the subjects they learn, what they go on to university to do. So policy around the creative industries spans everything from intellectual property, how that system works, research and development funding, skills, education. You have to think about industrial supports, tax, how the tax system's working, right through to, in an emergency, COVID happens, how do you support freelancers? Policy's really there in the background of all of those things. And when it doesn't work, we absolutely see it. In terms of sort of areas that we've worked on, a lot of it has been around trying to make sure that the sector actually in general is recognised by policymakers. One of the challenges, I think, for the sector, and by that I don't just mean arts and culture, I mean the whole creative industry is right through from like software development to sort of design, architecture, publishing, advertising, is that they're almost forgotten. I have a theory that it's because they're not on all the economics syllabuses. I did an economics diploma, and I always say this, we got to the bit on arts and culture and they said, this isn't really relevant or important. And so we skipped it and never came back to it. And then we also never had an example, I think, that mentioned really service sectors at all, apart from the financial sector. So that misses out huge swathes of the commercial creative industries too. So I think that at the moment, a lot of our work has been saying, look, this needs to be thought about at all in terms of the skill system, immigration system, trade. This needs to be thought about at all when it comes to research and development funding. But even when you get over that line, there's still massive consequence to what kind of policymakers oftentimes in Whitehall decide in terms of the reality of the experience of people in the creative sector.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really helpful to understand that sort of link and context as well. Now, I know you've been involved in lots of reports, but can you tell us a little bit about the ones that you're involved in 2018 that related to the future of creative work, and what they said at that time? Obviously, before there was going to be big changes. What did they say then?
Yeah, so we had kind of two big pieces which looked at creative work, and that was right after we won the bid for the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre. So this kind of brand new Arts and Humanities Research Council funded centre looking at these areas. And I suppose because it was such early days, we really wanted to put some big pieces out which set out kind of why this area was so important for us to concentrate on. So it really is a kind of wide view of some of the sort of challenges and opportunities facing the sector. But the first piece, which is about creativity and the future of work, really zeroed in on the fact that creativity really is likely to be a predictor of whether a job grows or not. Now, you'll see press totally dominated by art and AI, all kinds of ways in which technology is changing and shaping creative jobs. And I'm not here to tell you that's not the case. It's absolutely the case. But I suppose we still believe, and at the time believed, that talking to loads of experts who absolutely have a detailed understanding of both the jobs and also looking at what's been happening over the last decade, looking at existing trends, that using sort of creative practices in your job is likely to be a predictor of whether your job will grow in the future or whether it's more likely to be automated. One of the things that I thought was really cool about that piece is it also began to look at what are the complementary skills that you need. So it's sort of brought out things like project management and organizational skills, which if you've actually worked in the creative sector, you know are 100% essential. But I think that if you were looking into the creative sector, this sort of ability to produce brand new intellectual property, to transform things from one thing to another, those sort of dominate the headlines. But I think we all know it's that combination of, practical application with that creative skill as well that tends to have the best results. And then our second piece that we did was really building on that. And it was saying, okay, but let's look at digital skills too. So again, thinking about the future of work, I think if you asked most parents what skill is likely to help their kids, they would say tech skills. Are they learning to code at school? Are they learning how to use different digital software programs? And it's absolutely right that we know that our world is getting ever more digital. But again, using the same data set, which is combining all kinds of different data analysis as well as expert input, we looked across different roles and we looked across the entire employment system. And we found that it wasn't digital skills by themselves, which are a predictor of jobs' likelihood to grow. It was digital and creative that was like a special source, again, adding in some of those other things around project management. And when you think about it, it actually makes total sense because the jobs that are most likely to be automated are already using loads of digital programs. In fact, they're just one step away from those digital programs being able to do everything. But where someone is being creative with a piece of software, that's where we think there's a very good likelihood that the job is going to grow in demand.
It's really interesting. And how do you feel things have changed in these last 5 years, or have they changed?
So I would say, I don't know, things have obviously changed. The sector was absolutely tested. And I think looking at the creative industries as a whole, some parts were very successful during COVID. Think about the animation industry, which was absolutely booming. And even post-COVID, sort of film in the UK in terms of, production, absolutely booming. Also areas that were able to kind of work remotely. Lots of the kind of tech side, advertising, you're seeing some of these things perform extremely well. Where we found things were really challenged or where they were reliant on in-person interaction. And there is a big chunk of creative industry stuff which absolutely suffered. So think about the performing arts, cinemas, museums and galleries. although they were able to put things online and they did take their audiences online, fundamentally, these are kind of in-person experiences, and we found they really, really suffered. But in terms of the sort of trajectory, do I think that overall these skills are going to be less needed in the future? No, I don't think it's kind of shifted us off course that radically. I think some of the things which I know your journal kind of has moments of speaking about too would be around things like how people actually do their jobs. So how much time is spent sort of in an office versus at home. But I actually think that compared to other sectors, the creative industries were already sort of there. A third of the sector is freelance, and that is looking across every area. So that's looking across design and film and tech. Obviously, some are more, some are less. But overall, it's a very freelance sector. They were already used to hybrid working. We've been hybrid working for forever. I think what that means is that some areas of the sector were actually pretty well set up to do large chunks of hybrid working, but massively disadvantaged by losing that sort of super, I say the sector is like super networked, but a lot of in-person meetings are really important for the sector. So sort of lost that. So I think those are some of the kind of big shifts that I saw. And my fear, I suppose, with the pandemic is, one, can those areas that suffered recover? Two, for young people entering the sector, if we've moved into increasingly hybrid working with a kind of emphasis on working even more remotely, does that disadvantage those people who need to build networks for the first time versus those people who already have networks? That would be another kind of concern on my list. But in terms of the fundamental skills across most areas, I would say that looking long term, we still think that kind of magic source of digital proficiency, creative skills, mixed with really solid project management sets you up for a long-term career. Putting all that into a box and saying, that's brilliant, there obviously are challenges about pay in the creative industries. So on average, creative jobs are paid more than most jobs across the economy, by some margin, actually. However, that is hugely, hugely variable. So when you start to break it down by subsector, some areas, as you will know, and as I know, as someone who worked as a curator and looked at moving to London and doing that in London and thought, I actually really don't know if I can afford a rent which will allow me to get into work within the hour on my early curator salary. Some areas are paid much less. And some areas are paid much more. Some areas have what we call superstar effects. So the majority of people are paid almost nothing. And then some people increasingly are global celebrities and paid huge amounts. So that's true in publishing. If you're a writer, fewer and fewer people are kind of making it globally. And more people are kind of getting by on smaller salaries. That's true of musicians as it becomes sort of more international. Again, fewer are making it, but they are seriously making it. And then more people are finding it hard to make kind of money gigging. So to say that these skills are important for the future of the economy doesn't mean that in every area it's a hugely lucrative career, especially depending on what people choose to do with their skills. So we know the advertising sector, for example, people earn much more than the national average. And if you're a designer and you go into that area or into an industrial area, of course, you're likely to earn more. But we know that lots of creatives want to be really in control of how they use their creativity, and that's as important to them as salary. So we also see people make choices, which mean they're not earning their maximum, but they might be doing something that's kind of closer to what they would want to do on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, great that the jobs are growing, but there are still a bundle of problems. I haven't even talked about sort of diversity and inclusivity and some of the issues around that.
And if we look at the engaged membership kind of sector specifically, so particularly artists, curators, educators, everyone working in participation and engagement in terms of visual art, so often at galleries and museums, what are your thoughts for the challenges for us specifically, and particularly for Gen Z? Is there anything that you can identify?
Definitely. And I'm trying to think if there are challenges that are specific to post-COVID. I'm sure there are. I would say, so I don't want to just give a list of challenges because this is a sector I love and I think there are amazing experiences to be able to be had working in it. But to break it down, number one, reduced levels of public funding over quite a long period of time. Now, actually, I just released a piece which looks at this, but we're talking about quite substantial real terms, reductions in the level of public funding. Looking into a recession, you're also likely to see reductions in things like commercial revenue and also in terms of philanthropy. So the public arts sector in particular, but actually also the public-private kind of hybrid sector is facing tough times, and they were already facing tough times. Since really 2008, 9, 10, we've seen that slow reduction in terms of public funding, which has been a bedrock for many museums, galleries around the country. So problem number one. Problem number two is that it's a linked problem, but that thing about salaries. So salaries in that subsector can be extremely low. And obviously, depending on where you are in the country, it can be almost prohibitive to get into the sector at all without financial support. The knock-on of that is that it does necessarily mean that some people who have financial support kind of external to their job are able to get those jobs much more easily, able to worry less about their financial situation. That is completely devastating in terms of the actual diversity of a sector, which desperately needs to be thinking about broad audiences and not just one small section of people. So that's problem number two, I would say, is that sort of salary aspect and making sure that the way in which people are rewarded for the work they do enables everyone to do that kind of work, should they want to, and at least to be able to like have a go at it and, you know, be able to afford their rent in a comfortable way without relying on external funding. Other sort of issues. So 3, we are still looking at kind of a bit of a post-COVID slump in those areas. And again, heading into a recession. So we have to think about whether the audiences will return in full and what that will look like. And so, making sure that the audiences absolutely return and that you're looking at Gen Z audiences as well and trying to grow that is essential. We still have sort of overwhelmingly a young families with children audience, and then also a kind of retired audience make up such a big bulk of the kind of public art sector. But it's obviously really important that different generations want to engage. But then I think there are other like really interesting problems which are just sort of everlasting or have been around at least for a very long time around how you kind of address really complicated questions. We've got a lot of, big debates happening in the sector about how we are going to somehow address the most important and divisive questions of our time. How can the sector have conversations about these huge issues when often it's one person who, as I know, having worked as a curator, spending most of their time sort of going around printing things off, trying to put things in different folders, doesn't necessarily have hours and hours to think about how to represent complicated histories of say slavery on a piece of paper. So I think that there's sort of both theoretical questions that the sector is absolutely wrestling with and of course have always wrestled with, but now it really feels sort of almost like a very public discussion. And then you've also got this backdrop of very little time. We did a really cool piece of work actually which pointed to the fact that social media also means that sometimes it's very, quite low paid and junior members of staff who are having to publicly wrestle with questions, whether that was COVID or, for example, during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement in public consciousness, often sort of people who might be 22, 23, just out of university or didn't go to university, but very young, very inexperienced, were being told they had to speak for their organisation on these issues. Now, I don't think that person should have to take the responsibility of speaking for their organisation. And so as social media has become more important, I think these key questions, we do need to recognise that where previously the whole museum or gallery might have put out a statement, now we're sort of asking individuals to figure out what the statement would be. So there's a kind of additional problem within it as well, which I think has come as a result of social media, and I saw particularly over the pandemic.
It's a really interesting point that you make there, and something that I grapple with my students who are a master's level curatorial apprenticeship. So that's something that we're very much constantly looking at, alongside, of course, lots of practical skills. And it is easy to look at the problems in a way, and I think it's important we do that. But what should we also be celebrating, do you think, or looking forward to in the future?
Well, I think number one, that I don't know if other people had this, but the sort of joy of going back to these places post-COVID was hard for me to put into words. I think that the return to the physical really made clear to us how important the physical was. And to some extent said, yes, we can kind of bring the digital to the table and we can further digital, but this is not going to replace the in-person kind of interaction which can happen in these spaces. I also think, to add the kind of flip side to some of these public debates being an issue, I think that these public debates are critical, and I'm so glad to an extent that cultural organisations are able to lead the way in terms of some of the conversations that need to be had, especially in the UK, kind of post-colonial conversations, but actually globally, on many different issues. It's really fantastic to see that arts and cultural organisations are helping communities to have those conversations, individuals to question their own experiences and understandings of things. And so I think it's an extraordinarily exciting time to be thinking about theory of art, where it's absolutely in the public consciousness, maybe in a way it hasn't been since the sort of Victorian period. I say that as a totally biased person who's obviously very interested in that period. So yeah, I think that's definitely means it's a really vital time for people with big, challenging ideas to get into the sector. And so I also think, third, what's exciting? Well, I don't know if I'd say this is exciting, but in the paper I just wrote on the future of arts funding, I genuinely think there's an opportunity for the arts to come to the table for a new deal. A lot of the cuts that have happened over the last decade are slightly the law of unintended consequences. So the biggest drop by a huge margin is local authority funding. Local authority funding wasn't cut to cut the arts. Local authority funding was cut for lots of reasons, which I'm not going to go into. But it certainly wasn't sort of a lasered-in attempt to cut the arts. And actually, when you look at national budgets, yes, there's been cuts. There's also been some rises in other areas. And we're seeing arts and culture in all kinds of policy papers across the political spectrum, but especially around kind of how people feel pride in the place they live in, how people rebuild communities. And so I really hope that there will be a moment, especially with the kind of upcoming general election and party manifestos, where people are able to say, okay, we, the sector, have so much to offer. There are things that we need to do. There are things that government policymakers need to do. But actually, let's stop arguing over these small changes that are happening year on year. Take a step back and say, what does funding for the arts and culture need to look like for us to be able to achieve all the huge impacts that it can have? So I hope that, almost in part because we've kind of reached this point, that will encourage this big step back, rethinking, and a kind of new deal for arts funding.
Brilliant. Final question. The young people that you mention in the reports are about to finish secondary school next year or finish their GCSEs anyway. If you could give them a kind of, special gift or maybe a superpower, what would you give to them?
Oh, well, I'm sure, especially at the moment where it's not easy to convince your parents always that studying creative subjects is a good thing. And it's not always easy to even find academies in England don't have to teach art subjects. They don't have to follow the curriculum. So those young people who've decided to study creative subjects, especially if they're like me and they did a combination of creative and maths and other areas, will probably have had to push for that pretty hard and will probably already have lots of sort of creative gifts and persuasive gifts. So maybe I would give them, it's so boring, but maybe I'd give them a project management superpower. I think that it's something which, if you do go to art school, if you do want to go into creative industries, even if you study something completely different or don't go to university at all, do an apprenticeship, you are really going to need. We did a piece of research looking at why so many creative businesses hire graduates, because the sector is a massively graduate sector, but actually not all areas in the creative industries need everything that's taught at university. There's no reason why they couldn't hire people younger necessarily. And a lot of them said, we actually need people who are really able to kind of sort their own time. It almost was that project management skill, which people kind of have to learn at university, but it's quite an expensive way to learn how to get pieces of work in on time. So maybe I'd give them just brilliant that project management side, because I think that once you have your sort of creative impetus and you're really growing that, it can be hard to focus back on that boring side. But really having that underlying what you do, I think we found in our research around the future of work is just persistently something which is going to be asked for in every job that you do, and increasing jobs right up to 2030 and beyond. So yeah, what a boring superpower. Maybe they can fly as well. I'm not sure I'd want loads of kids to be able to fly. I think it'd be slightly terrifying, but yeah, maybe they can have something else. Perfect eyesight. I have terrible eyesight, so maybe perfect eyesight too. Just be a bit kinder to them.
I agree. And it is boring, but it's how things happen, especially whether it's educational programs, artist commissions, all of it. It's so important to get that project management.
Absolutely.
Big thank you to Eliza Easton, Deputy Director, Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, and you can find their reports on the Nesta website. Next, I'm flying through the online space to speak to Adam Stoneman, who is Spice Project Researcher at IMMA, the Irish Museum of Modern Art. Adam, welcome. Please, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your current work and projects? And also, what's your favourite piece of artwork of recent years?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for that, and thanks for having me. I'm Adam, and my role involves leading on the SPICE project, an EU research project which is developing methods and tools to support minoritised communities to share their perspectives through the IMMA collection. We're calling this process citizen curation. So IMMA is the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and it's based in Kilmainham, Dublin. It's home to Ireland's national collection of modern and contemporary art. So you asked me to choose an artwork. I think I'd have to go with Anathema, which is a video work by the Otolith Group. It features in their current exhibition here at IMMA, Xenogenesis. So this work presents us with the imagery of commercial advertisements on a touch screen. And gradually, it zooms in further and further, deeper and deeper into the screen until we're actually beneath the screen. And we're viewing the microscopic behavior of liquid crystals moving and churning beneath. What I really like about this piece is how it reveals the material basis of technology, the actual liquid crystals. And in showing us how they move abstractly and become grids, almost like a sort of city plan, it opens questions about what technology is actually made from, the raw materials they require, and how they are made. And it also allows us to imagine alternative futures.
Brilliant. I love the Otolith group and can't wait to see that piece. Now, you contributed a really excellent piece to the journal about digital engagement. Tell us about how this piece came about and why it's important to consider this issue.
Yeah, so through working with different community groups on the Spice project, I started to notice generational differences towards technology. So, for example, using iPads felt quite intrusive or obstructive even with older groups, but with younger people, there was a total fluency. They use technology in ways I wouldn't expect. From there, I wanted to set up an intergenerational conversation that could explore this further. So we had different roles, I suppose, representing arts education. We had Helen O'Donoghue, a museum educator and the former head of education here at IMMA, an artist, Aoife Dunn, a primary school art teacher, Eileen Campbell, and a recently graduated art student, Leon McCullough, representing a whole range of different generations. Together, we reflected on the ways in which new generations are changing our understanding of the digital and the role of technology in accessing and participating in the arts. Rather than an antagonism between generations, what emerged from this conversation was actually much closer to a sort of exchange of experiences. It wasn't a Gen Z tutorial. It was much more complex than a sort of technophilic Gen Z and a technophobic boomer. What we found was that younger people are actually quite keenly aware of some of the negative impacts of technology on their lives. Leon, for example, talked about going a whole year with an old Blockia phone because he was aware of how social media was impacting his mental health. And also, older people are aware, I think, of some of the attractions of technology for younger people. So I hope that this conversation delivers a bit more nuance into this conversation.
Also, you're involved in a new publication via IMMA that sounds very relevant to all of this, called Museum Technology, A Critical Primer. Tell us about this publication and how can we access it?
Yeah, that's right. That's the culmination of a working group that I helped set up a year ago with colleagues working at cultural institutions across Ireland. So we wanted to think through the social and the ethical implications of technology together, and particularly in a cultural context. I think that conversation has been missing. There's been lots of critical discussions about technology, but rarely thinking them through within the context of the museum or the gallery. We wanted to think about questions like, how are these technologies impacting museums and galleries and the communities that we serve? What ethical issues do we need to consider when thinking about VR or AI, for example? So out of this year-long process of collaborative research, we're publishing a critical primer, which introduces and explains a range of technologies and also offers some key issues for cultural workers and for artists to consider. So I hope it'll be useful.
Sounds fantastic, and thank you. Where can we download that from?
So you can download a digital copy from the Irish Museums Association website, and that's irishmuseums.org/publications.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, back on our main topic. Tell me your thoughts on what all of this means on how work might develop for Generation Z, and also specifically anyone working in visual art engagement.
So I think one thing that comes through in the piece is how technology gives on the one hand and takes on the other. And that's particularly keenly felt by younger generations, Generation Z. So on the one hand, technology seems to level the playing field because it makes artistic tools such as video, photography, sound production more widely accessible and gives you this platform to host your work for free. But on the other hand, I think it's also true that platforms like Spotify and Netflix are eroding and undercutting traditional cultural institutions and industries that for better or worse, do have still some opportunities to kind of nurture young talent. With these gone, I think it's actually making it harder for younger artists in many ways, particularly if you think of music. Spotify has made it much more difficult for pop and rock bands to make a living, because this model of payment that they use of sort of 0.001 cent per stream is so much less than you can get from album sales. So as Eileen says in the piece, it's not that the gatekeepers have disappeared, the gatekeepers of culture, but more that they've moved, that the gatekeepers are now big tech companies. And it's these that have huge amounts of power to determine the viability of life as an artist today. In terms of the implications for those of us working in visual art engagement, I think the key question for us is how, and indeed whether, we want to use technology in our work. I think we need to stop thinking of technology as a neutral tool, but rather as a tool that contains a lot of assumptions built into it. So, for example, if we're thinking about using a VR headset, for example, in our work, sure, it could offer this incredible, spectacular, awesome experience for the user. But we should also be aware, I think, of how VR headsets can atomize and isolate. So we can actually lose some of the sociality that we have in a encounter with art, and of course the embodied experience of the museum. So I think it's not necessarily a question of not using technology, but rather that we should be more knowing and more deliberate and intentional in our use of technology. And we shouldn't use it unthinkingly or without considering the implications and consequences.
That's great. Yeah, I really think the criticalness can be missing sometimes with technology for sure. Adam, we're reaching the end of the podcast. What are you most looking forward to in 2023?
Yeah, so I hope it's going to be a good year. I'm looking forward to the publication of the critical primer, which we mentioned. That's next month. I'm also working on a project here at IMMA called Unseeing Traces, which uses a collection of objects from the historical kingdom of Congo to provoke a dialogue with the IMMA collection about performance and ritual and what objects can't show us. So that's going to open in April, and I hope it will continue our work of being a sort of radically public museum, and I hope it will help us widen our reach into new communities. And I should also say that we're not currently planning to use technology in this exhibition.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Adam in Dublin at the fantastic IMMA. Highly recommend that you visit if you can. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd say we've done a pretty good job of analysing Generation Z and the future of creative work. So I've been your host, Professor Sarah Perks, for the very first Engage Journal podcast. Do join me for episode 2, where we'll look at action. Thank you.